I always go back to let's run a super profitable $4 million company instead of a cash poor $5 or $6 million company. It usually goes back to, is your ego getting in the way? Are your emotions getting in the way? Or are your excuses getting in the way? And they're either going to tell you how much revenue or how many trucks they have. They're not going to tell you how profitable they are because most of them aren't. I'm not going to tell you how much revenue each one does or how many sit in the parking lot every day, but I'm going to tell you how many trucks they have.
The New Flat Rate Podcast.
The New Flat Rate!
For contractors ready to boost tickets, simplify business, and gain freedom. Today's episode is a little different. Instead of just talking about business, we're actually breaking one down. We walk through a real-world contractor scenario and uncover why so many growing companies still struggle with cash flow. We're joined by Paul Maskill of Blue Collar Business Advisors, who help home service businesses turn their numbers into consistent, profitable growth. And now your host, me, Natalie Cope, and your co-host, Danielle Putnam.
Today, I'm really excited because we're doing something a little bit different this episode. We're going to be walking through a real-world business scenario and have Paul break down what's working, what's broken, and what needs to change. Paul, thank you so much for being here for this conversation.
Thank you for having me, guys. I am excited, and I didn't know what I signed up for until you just told me. So let's dig in.
Let's do it. So, all right, Paul, here's the company. $4 million in revenue, growing fast, but cash is always tight. The owner feels like they're working more than ever, but not seeing it in the bank account. Now, where do you start when you look at a business like this?
Where do we start? We start with the data. At least I would. I would start with the data. And what I usually find, Natalie, is usually the data is not giving us enough information to actually determine what's going on, and we don't know actually what we're looking for. So many times what I find, say a $4 million company, the person who's doing their books was probably the same person that was doing their books when they were like them and their spouse. And then they like hired somebody to, hey, you can answer the phone, send out some invoices, I don't know, pay some bills, do the QuickBooks, all the things that we need to do. That's your job. That person's probably not equipped to then actually be running the accounting functions of a $4 million company. Like you said, when there's a lot of things going on, right? There's $20,000 a day of revenue happening. When this person originally started doing the accounting and bookkeeping, they were probably doing that in a month. So it's just a different business. And what I've learned is who got us and what got us to here is probably not the same who and the same what and the same how to get us to the next level. So I would start with the data. And from there, what we really need to figure out, at least at the very top, is when the money comes into the business, is it coming in at the proper rate? So how do we determine that? Well, first we need to know, in my opinion, we need to know what our cost of goods sold are. So cost of goods sold in the trades, two biggest things are going to be your labor and your material. I do financial assessments of companies every day. You guys know the numbers of businesses every day. There's probably 80% of the people that I talk to initially, they don't have their labor in their cost of goods sold. And what I mean by that is all the technicians, all the installers, everybody that's out in the field, turning the wrench, doing the work, we need to know what it costs to employ them because that is what we are selling. We are a service business and we are selling a service. But many times when a bookkeeper sets up their chart of accounts in QuickBooks, usually it's QuickBooks, they're just like, well, the only cost of goods sold is the material and products and equipment that you're actually selling and not the labor. So we get this like big lump of money that's not in cost of goods sold that just says payroll or it says labor. So first, before we look at anything, we got to make sure our accounting is set up properly. So then we can start to dig into this $4 million company and figure out why is there no money, even though the owner's working more than ever and he's thinking, man, I should just go back to like me and one guy and somebody answering the phone because I made way more money back then when we were doing 800,000 a year in revenue.
Yeah. When you actually open up their numbers, what are you looking at first?
So I am looking, so let's assume for example's sake, all their numbers are accurate now. I'm going to look at their gross profit. So what is our gross profit? It's our revenue minus our cost of goods sold. And again, cost of goods sold mainly is going to be your labor. Included in that labor is all the expenses that go with employing that person. So it's going to be their benefits. It's going to be their 401k. It's going to be the payroll tax. To me, it's going to be the workers' comp. So you're going to have all of the labor in there. You're going to have all of the materials, and then we have our gross profit. So revenue minus cost of goods sold is gross profit. Depending on the setup of the business, whether they're more heavy in construction or more heavy in replacements, or they're more heavy in service and maintenance, our gross profit margin target is going to be a little bit different. But in my opinion, the minimum for any home service company needs to be at least 50%. So this person who has a $4 million business, their cost of goods sold should be no more than $2 million. So that way we have $2 million left over to cover all of the other expenses that go with running the business. So that's where I would start.
So, where do businesses like this usually go wrong?
They usually go wrong because they still do not have a mathematical way to price what they are selling. So when they first start, they're like, I don't know, I need to make $100,000 a year. So I need to make $2,000 a week, which means I need to make $400 a day. So I'm just going to price my stuff, time and material. And they're like, okay, so my time's worth this because I'm going to work about, I don't know, 4 hours a day. So I need to charge X amount per hour. And then my materials, I'll just, either sell them at cost or mark them up a random percentage. I'm going to mark my materials up 10%. They're going to pick random numbers. As they go along and they start hiring other people, they start to realize, oh, I'm getting a little bit squeezed. I feel like I'm not making as much money, or I'm making a little bit more money, but I'm working more and more and more. And even at that point, say they're at a million or 2 million, they still don't have a way to actually price what they're selling. Now they usually get to the point where, well, let's call around to the competition and see what they're charging to replace a capacitor, or see what they're charging to install a sink, or what are they charging to put in a surge protector, whatever it might be. And they're like, well, that seems a little low, this seems a little high, so let's pick something in the middle. And they just pick a random number. And usually by the time we're working with them at $4 million, they still don't have it figured out. They're just like, I don't know, we get price increases, and if the vendor increases it by $50, we just, bump ours up $50 just to cover that increase. Well, if the increase is $50 and we need to hit a 50% gross profit, we need to bump it up at least $100 total, because 100 minus the $50 increase means we're making $50. So that's usually where they get it wrong. They do not have a mathematical way to actually price what they are selling. They don't know what their labor rate is. They don't know how they should mark up material, which means they don't know how they should actually price. And anytime they've gone through these exercises, they look at the number and they say, Natalie, nobody's going to pay that. You're insane.
So, what numbers matter most here?
What numbers matter most when we're looking at it is obviously what is the cost of the material and equipment that we are buying, that we are then selling. So what are we marking that up on? And then what is our, from a labor standpoint, what does it cost to send a technician out for 1 hour? What's our hourly rate? And a lot of times people don't know how to figure that out. And we don't want to get too far into the weeds, but they're like, I don't know, I pay my technician $35 an hour. So, I charge like $120 an hour. I figure that covers everything, right? But it does, what they're not looking at is what is their non-billable time. So the average service technician is probably working 50% of the time, which means the other 50%, he's driving, he's talking to a customer and getting a zero, he's loading up at the shop, he's eating lunch, he's cleaning out his van at the end of the day, whatever it might be. But out of an 8-hour day, he's only working 4 hours. But we got to recoup those 4 hours when it goes to figuring out our hourly rate. So all of the stuff that goes into that, like I said, the workers' comp, the payroll tax, the vacation, the benefits. We have to figure out exactly what does it actually cost us to employ somebody for 1 hour. And then going back to, well, what's our gross profit target on this? And then we start to mark it up. So those are, I would say that the biggest ones is what does it actually cost to send them out? And then what are we actually paying for material? Because I see a lot of people say like, I don't know, that thing's like around $100. Well, is it 90? Is it 120? Do you have your vendor send you a price every week? Does it update in your Service Titan or wherever it is? Or are you just kind of guessing it and assuming it's around $100?
99-ish.
Ish.
Yeah. I love what we're stumbling upon right now. Well, it's not stumbling, it's very intentional. But Natalie, if I may insert that we have a very simple, incredible billable hour calculator tool. And so let's put it in the show notes. If anybody wants it, then they can put in some very basic numbers and information to help calculate what their labor rate should be, what that billable hour is. But a more sophisticated way actually would be to reach out to Paul and say, okay, Paul, can you help me calculate based on all of my true costs? So if Paul did a deep dive into your financials and looked at everything and helped you to assess really where your billable hour should be, that would be awesome. So many times people don't know, they don't have, all their financial information readily available. And so then they don't talk to somebody like Paul. But I encourage you to do that, to reach out, let him take a look and help you do a very sophisticated calculation. In the meantime, also reach out and click the links that are going to be in the show notes for our billable hour calculator. That's just a very basic way to get you started on knowing where you maybe should be priced and what you should be charging.
Yes, I would agree. So I've seen that calculator because I was on a webinar that Danielle and Matt did with Flash Consulting. And it's super simple. Y'all like plug in like, I don't know, 3 to 5 numbers and it'll tell you, it'll be way more accurate than what you're doing now. I promise you that.
Yep. And then the next step for that is let's take that and what you have with all your financial statements and meet with Paul so that you can actually get a really good understanding of where all your money's going and how to make some changes for some very accurate costing.
So, Paul, what should the owner fix first?
So what should they fix first? It's so depending on this, if our gross profit is not where it needs to be, then we've got to fix that. Because if the money's coming in at the wrong amount, we're never going to be able to get ahead. And I see that happen a lot where everything else actually might be super efficient. They might not be spending a ton in marketing, but they're doing $4 million in revenue. Their overhead is really dialed in and, sometimes office payroll. So I look at overhead. So after gross profit, we have overhead. I look at it as three main buckets. We have our marketing bucket, we have our general overhead, which is, your vehicles, utilities, rent, software expenses, all that. And then we have our payroll for our office, our CSRs, dispatchers, office managers, general managers, those type of people. Usually we're actually pretty good on overhead, mainly because we don't have any money, extra money to spend because it came in at the wrong number. So it's like, well, we can't have a bigger shop and we're driving older vehicles and whatnot. We don't have money to spend on marketing. So those usually aren't an issue, but it is their pricing issue is holding them back from scaling and actually being able to sleep well at night. So I would definitely tackle price first. The next thing from there is usually office payroll. So how many people do we have that are supporting everybody out in the field? And I talk to so many companies. So this guy who runs a $4 million company, I'll talk to him and say, how much revenue do you think your current office could do? I'd be like, oh, $6 million easily. We don't need anybody else. Maybe we need like one administrative assistant, but we could support $6 million with the exact same office staff. And I hear that a lot because they're like, well, once we get there, we'll be profitable. Once we get to 6 million, then we're gonna have the perfect office staff. Well, what happens is one, you might not ever get there because you don't have enough money. So you're gonna run out of money before you get to 6 million. But a lot of times what happens is you start going up, say you're at 5 million, and then all the people in your office are all of a sudden working at more capacity. And they're like, Natalie, we need help. Natalie, we need help. We're struggling. And then you're like, okay, well, let's build to 7 or 8 million. So you actually never get caught up and never get profitable because you have a way too big of an office staff compared to the revenue you're doing. And this usually starts, and I like to use this example when this person started their $4 million company. They first had one person in the office doing all the things. They were the CSR, they're the dispatcher, they're doing the billing, they're doing the bookkeeping, they're doing all that stuff. But eventually, probably around, I don't know, this $800,000 mark, maybe $1 million mark, they're like, we need more people in the office. This person can't do CSR and dispatch. So that one person who was working at, say, 110% capacity, they're like cranking it out. They're working, 9, 10 hour days, not really taking a break. Now, all of a sudden, we cut their workload in half. We're like, okay, you don't have to do dispatching anymore. Now you just have to answer the phone and do these other tasks. Well, now you have two people splitting the work of a little bit over one person. So they're both probably at 60% capacity. And from then on, you never actually get anybody back to 100% capacity because you've set a new bar of like, we only really need to work like 5 or 6 hours out of every 8. So we start to build in just this mediocrity culture where we don't even know we're doing it, but nobody actually knows what it's like to work a full 8 hour day other than the very first person who started there. And since then, they're like, oh, this is way easier than it was, when we were doing less than 1 million.
That's fascinating the way you broke that down.
That's what I see way too often. And it goes to then having the difficult conversations of we actually don't need all the people in this office if we want to be profitable at 4 million, right? If we don't have enough cash, I always go back to let's run a super profitable $4 million company instead of a cash poor $5 or $6 million company, right? Like we can get this $4 million company to at 20% net profit if we do a few things. It usually goes back to, is your ego getting in the way? Are your emotions getting in the way? Or are your excuses getting in the way? And if you
Mhm.
let those three things not get in the way, it makes it a lot easier to build a profitable company, sleep better at night, and not have to be stressed about cash flow.
Will you put those as big words on the screen when he says that? Your ego, your emotions, or your excuses, which ones are getting in the way? And as an owner, as a leader, like I recognize all those, right? Right? It's like we do that. Like the emotions, especially, and I can say this because I, for years, loved to pretend that the new flat rate was not a family business. I was like, no, we're not a family business. We have a lot of family members and they don't all work here. So we're not a family business, right? But but what it meant for us that I wasn't confronting was because family members worked here, there were certain decisions that we did or did not make. And so when we were able to admit that and then be like, all right, we're going to run as the company that we really want to be and that we are, then you have to take the emotion out of it. But we had to confront that emotion that was like a phantom ghost. But once we confronted it, we were able to make different decisions, right? And so and it also shows up in all different areas. All you guys listening in, and Paul, Natalie, we know we've got emotional excuses for everything. Oh, but they've been here for 30 years, right? Uh,
Yeah.
oh, but they were there when we started. There's all these reasons that we do play small. Or it could be a supply house or a vendor partner of, oh, but we've been with them forever. This is the way that we've always done it. And then ego is an interesting one. Expand on that for just a second.
So if you go to any home service conference, probably within three questions, they're going to say what size company you are. And
Mm,
they're either going to tell you how much revenue or how many trucks they have. They're not
yeah.
going to tell you how profitable they are because most of them aren't. That's just the nature of it. But they love the pictures of, look at me, I've got 16 trucks. They're all wrapped. I'm not going to tell you how much revenue each one does or how many sit in the parking lot every day, but I'm going to tell you how many trucks I have. Or I'm going to tell you I'm a $4 million company.
Mhm.
Okay, that's great. It's hard to become a $4 million company. 90 some percent of businesses never make it to $1 million. But if you're a $4 million company and you're stressed, you don't have money, you can't sleep all at night, and you're just wishing and hoping and thinking, I think I just want to start over.
Yeah.
But it's the ego of going to these events and talking to people and really just being like, we don't really want the truth to be exposed because we hear it in their towns, right? A lot of us, most home service companies, we see the vans. We're like, and we'll tell them like, man, we see your vans everywhere. Like, oh yeah, thank you so much. It's awesome. We're growing so much. Deep down inside, they're like, yeah, but like we can barely put gas in those vans, right?
Mhm.
But within the community, everybody thinks we're successful, so that perception is kind of masking a lot of things versus the people that are building $4 million companies at 20% net profit, they're not talking about it. They're not posting it on social media. They got their head down, they're focused, they're making the decisions. They're building a team, they're building the culture, and they're not bragging about it on social media or bragging about it at conferences. And that's to me one of the biggest issues in any business, and especially in the trades, is, you know, we're just going to pound our chest about how many trucks we have or how much revenue we're doing.
Yeah. And getting past that ego and setting it aside and deciding, you know what, I want business to be fun again. I want it to be profitable. I want to grow and not worry about that. It takes a layer of humility and letting the walls down and really doing the work. It's a big one.
It's huge.
Examples. And then the excuses. I mean, I love these ego, emotions, and excuses. Talk
Yeah, I mean, we can justify in our head anything, and we can believe it, right? We're the ones writing the story, so we can tell ourselves, well, we'll be profitable for this guy. We'll be profitable once we get to 6 million, or we would have been profitable if this didn't happen, or man, these three things happened and they totally got in the way. But then when we like look back over the course of time, it's like, well, we've never been profitable, and we've always lied to ourselves of why we're not profitable. And that's just the nature of it. We're always telling ourselves, well, next year's the year, next year's the year. And then COVID happens, and then it's hard to find people to work. And then we don't have then we don't have material and equipment. And we can always justify it, but I promise you, there's people out there figuring out making it happen. If not, private equity wouldn't be pouring all this money into this industry. they're buying the profitable companies. They're buying the ones where people just stop, once you stop lying to yourself and start realizing it is possible, you just have to chart, even just the excuse of nobody will pay that price.
Hmm.
You guys know better than anybody. The
Hmm.
customers who spend the most money are the ones that write the longest Google reviews. They're the ones who refer you the most because to me, the price is an indicator, or how much they spent is an indicator of how well you serve them.
Hmm.
That's all it is. You gave them options. They picked one. They're thrilled because you're the first person ever to walk in their house and tell them all these things that you noticed and educated them and let them make a decision on what's best for them and their family.
Hmm. So true. And that's why I love numbers and data like you in let's find out where we are. Let's be honest with our benchmark. Where are we today? What does it all look like? And then we have to have accountability for growth. Over the past year, I've listened to a lot of people that are like, leaders don't need accountability. If you have to have accountability, then you're not a leader or you're not, an executive. You're not. And I'm just like, I think we all need accountability. We all need accountability in our health, in our family, relationships, religion, our business. We need accountability all over the place. We need community. We were created for community, and that community does create the accountability, the iron sharpening the iron. And so if you're hanging out with a bunch of people that are very unhealthy all the time, I'm not the first to say it, right? It's just easy to compare yourself to that and to stay there. And if you hang out with people that only binge watch TV all the time, that's all they talk about, it's easy to keep doing that and staying there, right? But when you bring in accountability and people from all walks of life all over the place that grow you, that force you up, this is going to be a quick little plug for Freedom Builders University Mastermind coming up in May in Key West, Florida, to be around leaders who are challenging each other and who are excelling. But it's easy to stay and not confront your ego, emotions, and excuses in your business to stay unprofitable. I feel like that was a long little riff, but Paul, back in 2020, during COVID, we only went home for a minute, for just a short minute. We're like, okay, everybody can work from home because the world is making us for 2 weeks and that's it. And then we're going back to the office. For those 2 weeks, I'm like pacing in my basement office, pacing, 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 pacing. But so I picked up the book Shoe Dog, Phil Knight, the Nike story. Have you ever read it?
I have not.
Oh my
I
gosh.
I have
So
heard so many people that said it's amazing though.
well, it is. It's just fascinating. We all know Nike shoes. And so
Mhm.
this is the starting of it's a big book. So I'm pacing, during COVID reading this book. But Phil Knight in this book, he says, we were at $125 million and we were broke. We didn't know if we could go another day. And that's what you're talking about here. We have to confront our ego, emotions, our excuses. We have to be honest with our numbers. And I strongly believe we need accountability so that we can be honest and quit lying to ourselves. Next, Natalie.
100%.
Next is what's the fastest way to improve cash flow?
The fastest way to improve cash flow. So I'll give you what I believe is the fastest way, and then we can talk numbers. But the fastest way is to realize that you need to start doing things differently than you've done them before, and being okay with having the difficult conversations and making the in their mind difficult decisions that we got to change the way we price or we got to change the way we buy products because our vendor is just not giving us the best terms. They were great when we were $800,000 company, but they're not great when we're a $4 million company. Or we're going to have to change the way we compensate our people because paying someone $40 an hour and having no incentive to actually deliver any revenue per day just isn't serving us. So to be honest, like that's the biggest thing getting in the way of most people's cash flow issues is they're doing the same thing but expecting different results. And as we all know, that's the definition of insanity. If we want different results, we have to be willing to do things differently. What got us to a million is not going to be the same thing that got us to four, and what got us to four is not going to be the same thing that got us to eight. So that's like the non-numbers
Mhm.
answer because I truly believe that's the biggest thing. The biggest thing getting in the way of them doing that is usually the pain is not enough to actually make a change, right? They're okay. They're just enough okay to not be willing to change. So to Danielle's point, they do need that accountability. And what I do as a CFO is like part numbers and then mostly actually coaching. Because once the numbers tell us what to do, then it's my job to actually get the owner to do something different than they've done the last 10 or 15 years. So that's really the biggest thing getting in the way. But as far as like the numbers, usually the number one thing getting in the way is their price does not align with their cost structure.
So what's one thing this company is probably not paying attention to?
Yeah, so there's so many things that, and going back to what the owner said of, there's no money in the bank, but I feel like we're making good money. I talk to a lot of owners who are like, I don't know, the accountant says the P&L looks okay, but where did all the money go?
Yeah.
Right? So your profit does not equal cash. I think that's a big misconception of what your P&L statement says does not necessarily mean how much cash is in the bank. So there are things that happen on the balance sheet that impact cash but do not impact your P&L. So things like accounts receivable. So if you're not collecting upon completion, that's going to be a big issue. And when you look at the number and how long some people have been outstanding, that's an issue. Another issue is, accounts payable. So we've already factored in all these expenses, but maybe we actually haven't paid them out. And then when we do actually pay them out, it's like, whoa, we actually owe these people way more than I thought we did. Paying down debt. So anybody that has debt, any principal payment does not impact your P&L. So if you've got 15 vehicles, but you only need seven, and you're like, I don't know, my P&L says we're still profitable, so these extra vehicles aren't really costing us. Well, because most of the payments aren't actually hitting the P&L. So that's another big issue. So, and then owner's draws, paying for taxes, all those things, those also don't hit your P&L. So those are some of the big issues that I see owners not paying attention to. Again, they don't have to be finance experts, but at the end of the day, they are the only shareholder of their company. And if you were buying stock in your company, would you actually buy stock in your company? And usually the answer is no, because it's not making money. We buy stock in company. Why would I buy stock in Nike? Because they continually make more money, which means the value of the company goes up, and then they actually give some of that money back to me in dividends. So we only buy stock in companies that make money and grow. If your company's not making money or growing, but you have all of your net worth and a lot of your wealth, you know, tied up in your business, then it's time to start looking at your business as you are the only shareholder or a majority shareholder of this stock. You should probably start being a steward of that and actually start doing something about it instead of just being okay. I always go back to the movie Office Space. If anyone's seen the movie Office Space,
Gosh.
people do just enough to not get fired. Business owners do just enough to not go out of business. And they
Mm.
always figure out a way because they are entrepreneurs. So like if you can figure out a way to break even, I would challenge everybody. Every time money comes in, just take 10% and put it in a different account, and that's your new break even. And you will 100% figure it out if you have to, because everyone can figure out how to break even. If you can figure out how to break even, then figure out how to make it work with 10% profit.
Mhm. That's good, Paul.
So, bringing it to everyone listening, what do strong businesses do differently when it comes to cash flow?
Strong businesses get super clear on what a success look like. So they're actually putting numbers to success. How much revenue are we doing? And then how do we break that out? What's the average ticket? How many invoices are we creating? What's our gross profit? What's our marketing spend? What's our overhead spend? And what's our office payroll spend? They're going to set targets to all those, because if we're not keeping score, we don't know if we're winning or losing. But if we know we're going to do $4 million and we're going to have 50% gross profit, and our office payroll is going to be 10%, our marketing is going to be 6%, and our overhead is going to be 10%. Now say we're at a 24% net profit business. That's how we define success for 2026. Now, where are we at today? So where are we actually winning? Where are we losing? And then once you know where we're losing, going back to, we're going to remove the emotion, the ego, and the excuses. If we are losing in gross profit, don't worry about anything else. Fix gross profit. That's your biggest issue. A lot of times we as business owners will just chase the bright, shiny object to convince ourselves that we're super busy and it feels productive, but nothing's actually changing because we're chasing the wrong thing. So if we actually start keeping score of what does winning look like, and we know based on those numbers, what I just said, right? Those are the targets. That's what success looks like. And then we figure out which one is the furthest away from where we want to be. If you go back to like a Dave Ramsey debt snowball, whether you like Dave Ramsey or not, he simplifies personal finance for most of America. Look at the debt snowball. He's like, just attack this and then attack this, then attack. You're attacking one thing at a time instead of 100. Do the same thing in your business. If gross profit's the biggest issue, tackle that until it's not an issue. And then the issues you tackle become smaller and smaller. You're like, okay, gross profit's dialed in, but overheads, off by like 2%. Okay, so let's figure out what those 2% is. Can we optimize that? Or do we just need to get a little bit better at revenue? Oh, our average ticket's too low. Well, if we increase average ticket by $50, all of a sudden we've solved the overhead issue. So that's what the best owners do. And then they do this regularly. They don't set a budget in January and then forget about it until the end of the year. They set these targets, they create their budget, they create their forecast, and then on a monthly basis, at a minimum, they're then checking in on these. Hey, are we getting better at gross profit? Or are we getting worse? Oh, why did it get worse this month? Let's dig into that. Oh, I
Mhm.
see this vendor overbilled us because we said we're going to pay $80 for a surge protector and they charged 120. And then all of a sudden, it act like we're solving real problems and we solve them, we actually see results on the other end.
Well, what are the warning signs things are about to break?
I would say the easiest warning sign, just for to keep it super simple, is look at your bank account. How much money is in your bank account? Could you pay your bills for 3 months with that bank account? So, do you have at least 3 months of expenses in the bank today? If not, life is pretty stressful. Most companies I see are way less than that. There's plenty of companies that have like 2 weeks worth of cash in the bank and they're hoping they get paid on this and then they're pushing their vendor out here. If you don't have at least 3 months of cash in the bank, that to me, I mean, that's just super simple to look at. Anybody can do the math. Hey, this is our average monthly expense. This is how much cash we have in the bank. If our average monthly expense is 100 grand, then we need at least 300,000 in cash in the bank. If we don't, we're in probably more trouble than we think.
Mhm.
Yeah. Why is a strong business plan such a game changer?
Because you stop guessing. So when you actually have a plan and a strategy and you know what success looks like, you don't have to wake up every day thinking, what fires am I going to put out? You go from being reactive to proactive. And then you actually know, what am I going to do today to move to get a little bit closer to where we want to go? But if you don't have a plan, you don't have a strategy, you haven't defined success, you're going to get, and I've used this analogy before. So I live in Raleigh. Raleigh has this, they call it the Beltline. It's literally, they call it an interstate, but it's not because it literally just goes in a circle around Raleigh. Most business owners get in their car and they drive around this Beltline all day. They drive in circles, drive in circles, drive in circles. They park at the end of the day. They're exhausted because they were so busy all day. Man, I worked for 8 hours straight. And then you ask them, well, what did you actually do? And did you get close to where you want to be? And they're like, "Mm, I don't know. I don't think so." So what we need to do is you need to define where is your destination and then where are we at today? And then how are we going to get there? So instead of just getting in your car all day and driving in a circle, instead, if I'm in North Carolina, I'm going to get to Georgia. Well, now I know exactly. I have checkpoints. I know, oh, I'm getting closer. Oh, there's this mile marker. Oh, yeah, someone said I would see this when I got to this point in my business. And now all of a sudden, you can actually feel it. You can see it that you're actually making progress versus just being busy all day.
So, how can owners spot gaps before they cost them big?
How can they? So owners are pretty good at having a gut feeling. I
Mhm.
will say this, gut feelings are usually pretty accurate. A lot of times they're like, I don't know, something doesn't feel right. This is way too stressful. It shouldn't be like this, but I don't know what it is. And to me, that's the first sign that something is not right. You've got to trust your gut in that sense. Now, once you have that feeling of, hey, we don't have 3 months of cash in the bank, or man, it really shouldn't be this hard to make payroll. I feel like we're busier than ever. We got more trucks than ever. The board's jam-packed. If you're doing all those things and you're making way less money than you were when it was just like you and your helper and your wife answering the phone, then something's wrong. So at that point, then it's a matter of going back to what we talked about before. You don't have to try and solve every. What makes entrepreneurs great is we're willing to just do everything. We can solve it. We can figure it out. We're going to stop. We're not going to stop. But we can only push that rock up the hill so far before we actually need help. And the best business owners, once they have that feeling, they know something's broken, it's okay to raise your hand and say, I need help because you're not an expert at everything. And the most successful, Elon Musk does not know how to build a Tesla, but he doesn't need to know how to build a Tesla, right? Like he had the vision
Mhm.
and he started, but then he started putting the people into place, the processes in place, and he figured it out, but he didn't have to figure it out all on his own.
So, Paul, who do you typically help at Blue Collar Business Advisors?
Yeah, so my favorite people to work with, they are home service companies, mainly focused on service. They're not doing a bunch of new construction because new construction is just a race to the bottom. The people who win that race go out of business first. So I don't love working with business models that aren't super fun. But they're doing at least $3 million in revenue. And the reason I pick that number is one, usually the owner isn't completely inundated with working in the field all day. It's really hard for me to get a business to get results when the owner is still doing all the things out in the field, giving estimates, running service calls, and doing all that stuff. And they also have a consistent stream of leads coming in it already. I am not a marketer. I'm not going to solve your lead problem. But if you've solved those things, usually you've got a really good brand. You've got a lot of good, a lot of strong Google reviews, a lot of 5-star reviews. You've already done a lot of the hard work, in my opinion. You've actually figured out probably more than you think, but now you just need to make it profitable, and then you actually need to scale it up to achieve your goals. So those are my favorite people. They're doing at least 3 million in revenue. They've got bigger goals. They feel stuck. And that's where we step in. Is our number one job is to make sure they create consistent positive cash flow. They have predictable profitability, so that way they can achieve the goals they sought when they started their business. When everyone starts their business, they have this grand vision to have a better life. We're going to travel more. We're going to spend more time with our kids. We're going to invest in real estate. And then before you know it, like our example, we're doing $4 million. We don't have any cash. And we're wondering, why in the world am I doing this in the first place?
Paul, thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation with us. I know it's going to be super valuable information. Where can everyone find you? We're going to have links and everything in the description to get in contact with you.
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to thebluecollaradvisors.com. That's my website. You can check out, there's other various resources, book a call, check out the podcast that I have. And then I'm actually going to Freedom Builders event in November 2026. So I will be there as well. So y'all should sign up. We can hang out in person.
Thank you so much. And to the listeners, thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more about the new flat rate, go to TheNewFlatRate.com. If you want to learn more about Blue Collar Business Advisors, go to TheBlueCollarAdvisors.com. Lastly, don't forget to check out that billable hour calculator in the description.